Well, good morning. Thank you for being here. I'm a little uncomfortable because I'm tethered back here. I tend to be one that wants to walk around a little bit. But again, I'll echo the appreciation for everybody being here bright and early this morning. Today's discussion, I'll leave plenty of time for questions, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions. And I'll try not to say anything out of line. I have a couple of areas where there are things associated with acquisitions where I may have to limit the discussion, but for the most part, I'll try to be as transparent as possible on the topics that we're gonna discuss. So I think the best job at DISA because what we do is we deliver enterprise capabilities to all of DoD. And so I have a division of folks that actually deliver existing capabilities and are developing new ones. But we also have partners that are helping us to shape what we're doing in the area of unified capabilities. That's a term we in the Department of Defense use. Not everybody agrees on what the scope of UC is, but today I'll try to talk about what we mean when we say that, where we're going with the enterprise services and what we're trying to do. So let's see. Okay, so up here, what you see on the top are what I consider the areas of UC: voice, video, collaboration. We think of that as web conferencing and chat capabilities, and then we also have email, content management, office productivity. And I put all that stuff together in one row. That's the area that I'm trying to attack. And there's a couple of things that we're trying to do there. And the first is we're trying to look at what we've done historically, which is the next row down. And you see that we have a voice service called Enterprise Voice over IP, and it's analog on the classified side, so Enterprise Voice, classified voice over IP. That capability is a fantastic capability, and it is absolutely something that we should be doing for the entire Department of Defense rather than having all the individual components and agencies doing their own thing. So that's one of the concerns that I have is let's look at the areas where we should do something once as the DoD enterprise, vice doing it many times separately. The next area is video. So we have a tremendous amount of video conferencing that goes on in support of a lot of different missions within the Department of Defense. We provide a service called GBS. We'll talk a little bit more about that capability. That replaced a long-running ISDN capability, and it's up and running, and we're doing, I think, some fantastic things for that across the department. DCS is an interesting story as well. Defense Collaboration Services arose out of the old NCES program that some of you might remember. And what it does is provide that web conferencing and chat capability to everybody in the Department of Defense with no cost to those organizations. So anybody that's doing that stuff separately on their own right now is wasting money, and that's something that we have to stop. But the one neat thing about that particular capability, we've always kind of looked to the adopt, buy, and only create things at the last resort. DCS is based on open source, and so it's a license-free capability, and that means a lot to us. It's an area, something that we would like to do more of in the future, but we really don't want to be in the business of developing things that exist out there as well. So we need to find affordable ways to do things like DCS and provide that to the entire department. Most folks are familiar with what the Department of Defense has done with Enterprise Email, DEE. It's our largest single enterprise service that DISA offers to the Department of Defense, with approximately 2 million users on both the NIPRNet and the SIPRNet. It's a Microsoft Exchange-based capability that's hosted in our computing centers and other facilities around the Department of Defense. And it's part of what we're going to talk about as we try to unify these capabilities. The next one is the Defense Enterprise Portal Service, DEPS. It's a SharePoint-based service for everybody in the Department of Defense, but it is a subscription. So like GBS, it is something that organizations can subscribe to and pay their way for that, rather than standing up their own SharePoint or content management services. And then finally, DISA provides enterprise licenses for a lot of different products, but one of them that's a big deal is the Office Productivity Suite. Some organizations have their own enterprise services or enterprise license agreements as well, but they're essentially the same thing as we can provide. So if an organization doesn't want to enter into those agreements at their own level, this provides a capability for them to do that. So I think an interesting thing to consider is what is the nature of how these things are going to be delivered by industry in the future, and compare that to how we have grown up these individual disparate services over time, and what are the opportunities to unify those things over time. One of the things that we're trying to do with the DIOS program that I'll get into a little bit more is to leverage commodity IT services and let our industry partners deliver those IT services rather than having our own warfighters doing that in-house. So we're trying to be good partners. We want to use the things that have been developed in support of all the UC missions that we need help on, and then the most important thing that we're going to get to is that we need to make sure that as we do that, we have either at least as good of security as we have now, or better security would be ideal, and that we do it in a cost-effective manner. We know that DISA has a reputation for being slow and expensive, and as an Air Force guy, that's what I talked about for about 24 years. We tried to do our own thing when it didn't make sense to pay more money. In fairness, I have learned that there are times when we were fooling ourselves about what the total cost to operate a lot of different things was, and I think we're working through those things as we do business cases for what will become DIOS. So DIOS is intended to be a software as a service, cloud-based offering to deliver all those capabilities that's on the top row, and kind of listed separately within the DIOS, the third row there. It probably looks to you like a lot of commercial capabilities that you might be familiar with. We are not looking for any particular underlying technology. There's only a handful that are out there right now. A lot of folks that can deliver those technologies to us, though. So our intent is to leverage a capability that exists, that is being delivered to other customers as well, and to do it securely for the entire Department of Defense in a cost-effective manner. One area that is somewhat different than what we provide right now is the last one on the right. Under records management, what you see is we in the Department of Defense have a NARA records management requirement, and we meet that essentially with primarily manual methods, which is a way to say that we sort of fool ourselves into imagining that we track all of the records that we're supposed to manually, because that falls on me, and I probably don't do a very good job of it. We have a couple of niche services like under DEE where we provide journaling and some of the support for those kinds of records management, but as a whole we don't do it for all the things that we provide electronically, and we expect that as a native part of DIOS there will be some records management capability, but we also expect to have full NARA compliance available for those users that require it or desire it and can afford it, that we can bolt on to a DIOS capability. So we expect that the Department of Defense will issue a mandate that all flag level officers and SESs and above will have full automated records NARA compliant management once we move to the DIOS model. So underlying that, and frankly, one of the reasons why I think it's important to do this at the Department of Defense level versus at the MILDEP or agency level, is that we are going to leverage all of the underlying infrastructure that DISA has in place one time. We're not going to have everybody reinventing the wheel on how to do identity and access management, enterprise directory services, PKI, and all of the UC infrastructure that I've talked about with some of the legacy programs. So some of this stuff will not go away under DIOS. And a good example is the voice over IP. We are going to connect software as a service UC offering under DIOS to our underlying voice infrastructure to allow users to be able to have a true, soft client, hard phone, command and control type capability eventually. That will not be native to a software as a service, because at present, the Department of Defense does not believe that software as a service can deliver voice at the assured service or C2 level just as a SaaS. There's an underlying infrastructure that's required to deliver that capability. So we present a unique challenge on the bottom there as well, in that we expect to do this at the Department of Defense scale, and that has not been done before. A private software as a service cloud-based offering for DIOS is a factor of at least 10 larger than anything that's been done in industry thus far. So we know that's a challenge, but we know that there are technologies to do that. So that's something that we'll need partnerships and help from industry to reach. So as the portfolio manager for UC, I fortunately am not the person in charge of every program that delivers UC. I give strategic guidance to those programs on the directions that we're going to pursue, and this is what I gave them in the past year as we planned our budgets. The first is that we're going to consolidate enterprise services. So where there's duplication of existing services, our intent is to eliminate or minimize that duplication. And then each of the programs needs to begin working on their activities to allow for a transition to DIOS and to be prepared for migration activities of existing customers to move over there. And we'll talk a little bit more about those migration activities. But I'll jump ahead just a second. One of the things that implies is that we're probably not going to make huge investments in the legacy capabilities as we move forward, because it just doesn't make sense. That said, there's some uncertainty about the timeline for DIOS, and we have some tech refresh activities that need to go on, and we're trying to make those on a case-by-case basis. We want to achieve affordability in our capabilities, and we've begun doing that in lowering the cost of delivering all of our existing services. But DIOS has to be affordable, and I'll show you a few numbers here in just a little bit. But if DIOS is unaffordable, it is done. It is not going to happen, and we'll either have the MILDEPs and agencies pursuing their own similar solutions, or we will remain with the legacy capabilities for some period of time and pursue other options. One of those other options that General Lynn has asked us to look at is license-free options, that open source kinds of products. But I'll be honest with you, I'm concerned about whether or not, if we pursue open source options for some of these capabilities, whether or not we would achieve the buy-in from our customers, whether it would be a service that they would want. And frankly, it's a role I do not choose to have. I don't want to be developing capabilities that you have already developed for commercial industry as well as the Department of Defense. We need to deliver accessibility for mobility for all of our capabilities. So that is one caveat about investment in the existing programs, is we are making them all mobile accessible. In some cases, that means that we're taking a commercially available app, and we're adding whatever PKI and things are necessary to get that on the enterprise. Along with that, one of the things that we're doing in terms of mobile accessibility as a first step in some cases is delivering HTML5 type of options so that we can eliminate or minimize the need for clients. And as a service provider to the entire Department of Defense, clients are often what I would call the bane of my existence, because I have a hard time getting organizations to load those clients on their networks, on their desktops. They all want to go through their own security vetting, no matter how secure and how much approved products listing testing and so on that we put into these capabilities. Everybody has a hard time, and I'll single out the Navy for being especially difficult to get things on NMCAI, NGen, and we're trying like the devil to overcome those capabilities. But once we have HTML5 and those types of browser-based access, it'll be hard for organizations to prevent users from having access to the enterprise services. We just can't have that in the Department of Defense. Support all devices. So I mean, in that case, it's very, very similar to mobile accessibility, but we want it to be capable of supporting tablets, virtual desktop infrastructure, as well as handheld mobile devices. There's a different form factor for a lot of mobility, so we're trying to make sure that it makes sense for our capabilities. The next one, ensuring coalition and allied support readiness, is especially challenging for us. So what we're saying is we don't want to have separate services that we provide just for our allied and coalition mission partner collaboration. We have done that in the past. So right now, under the GBS program, we have GBS-A for Allied, and it's entirely ISDN-based. We want to get away from ISDN, and we want to use IP networks for all of the video teleconferencing that we do with our mission partners. There are a lot of challenges with that from a security perspective. How do we separate out an enclave just to support the different, bilateral and all the various flavors of allied and coalition partners that we need to collaborate with? We even have a problem in the Department of Defense about how we actually pay for that because of the way we enter into unfunded agreements with those organizations. So that's something that we're working through. Eventually what we will find on that is that those things are infrastructure costs, and we will probably not consider those part of our enterprise services, but will be a cost of running the DISN to have video and voice delivered and to support those same things for our coalition and allied partners. And I mentioned ISDN. We want to get rid of outdated technologies in the entire inventory of UC services. So the voice folks, first of all, are trying real hard to have an option for everybody to eliminate their TDM voice. And as a guy who's studied some of the costs associated with UC, I can tell you that elimination of everybody's separate telephony is the easiest business case for us to make in the Department of Defense. There is no reason why the Air Force, the Army, the Navy have base or regional level voice services provided, provided by legacy TDM. We can provide that service at the enterprise level and deliver all the redundancy and all the things that we need to do for C2 and assured level service for voice via infrastructure over the IP network. We have those capabilities. We can do that, and we have to do that for voice. We face some interesting challenges in the I call it the UC steering group. Now they have a slightly new name, but it's really the coalition of all the folks in the services and agencies that work in this space. The voice folks are nervous about whether or not an enterprise service can support them, and we think the voice service can support them. We have challenges associated with 911 access, local access, et cetera, but there are options for how we can work through those challenges, and that's what our programs are doing. So one of the areas that I'll talk about is some work that we're doing in the Joint Service Provider and what we're going to try to do for all of the National Capital Region in the area of voice. I talked about elimination of ISDN. If you talk to senior leaders across the Department of Defense, what you find out is that the quality of video conferencing degrades automatically to the lowest common denominator, which tends to be ISDN, and then everybody has a bad experience with conferencing. So that's something that we need to work through. So here's a different look at the same kinds of sets of capabilities that we showed in the first slide. And this is what we're calling the scope of DDoS. So I made it small so it'd be almost impossible to read. No, not really. But we're going to talk about the same things. We want to do messaging, which entails the standard things that you would expect with email, contacts, tasks, as well as calendaring functions. We want to do collaboration. I think collaboration, when we first put together the NCES program, we looked at collaboration as web conferencing and chat. There's a lot more that's happened in the 10 to 12 years since that time, and I think we as the department need to recognize that. So we're actually in the process of coordinating the requirements document for DIOS with all the services. We just got about 500 comments back from the 06 level coordination. We're reconciling those with the folks in the Pentagon, and we're going to go back out for flag level coordination of those requirements. And I think one of the beautiful things about what we're trying to do with DIOS is that we're going to leverage industry's automated modernization or evergreen technologies rather than trying to do all of the updates ourselves, because as we heard in some of the discussions yesterday, all the upgrades to get to something that is 2 versions out of date is not something that we want to do. We know that these things can be delivered more efficiently and kept more current than we have been able to do. In our conversations with Mr. Halverson before he retired and Dr. Zangardi, we're adamant about making sure that we keep the technology as close to current and while maintaining the security that we need for DIOS as well. One thing that we do that's a little bit different in the Department of Defense than most of our industry counterparts is we rely very heavily on persistent chat. So our watch floors, our operations centers tend to have a continuous chat room open to discuss the situations that are going on, and we find it drives a little bit different usage of the clients than most of the industry partners that leverage chat. So that's an interesting area where we might have slightly different requirements than industry, but we as the department are also committed to trying to use the industry capabilities as they are delivered versus making any of this seem like DoD unique requirements. We would, however, like to influence the direction that those products might change over time. Web conferencing is a great capability, and it's kind of an analog to desktop video conferencing. Probably typically not as good a video, but it has some better typically features for sharing content while you're having a web conference. We know that we have saved tens of millions of dollars in unnecessary travel that was avoided by using web conferencing in the Department of Defense. One of the problems that we have with web conferencing is that unlike video conferencing, web conferencing has no standards. They tend to be proprietary offerings, and that doesn't help us when we're trying to do things like supporting allied and coalition partners like we discussed earlier. In the area of content management, I think we've found that the Department of Defense has typically used SharePoint for the most part, although there are some other competing technologies, including open source technologies that we're interested in as well. But this is where we store our knowledge, and it's especially important as we try to secure the desktops so that if somebody walks away with your laptop, there's no content on there that is useful for them. We want folks to store things on the enterprise portal that allows everybody in the organization to discover information as appropriate. But we also want them to have capabilities to do a Dropbox type style where you can store all of your content somewhere other than on your local machine. It's what we do at home. It's what we want to do in the Department of Defense, and it helps us achieve better security than we have today. Voice and video are the two areas that are the most interesting because we're having the most debates about what software as a service can do in the area of voice and video. So software as a service implies that it's not an infrastructure-heavy capability. Cloud implies that we're delivering this in a virtualized experience for the service that helps us scale and expand and contract, et cetera. The elasticity of cloud is really important to us. Most of our partners are not terribly comfortable with the idea of that top level command and control or assured voice and video being delivered by software as a service. Currently, we do that by an infrastructure-heavy approach, either through something like GBS or something like eVoIP and eCVoIP. So I think there's a role for those things to make sure that we deliver voice over IP. So the reason those boxes are in white right now is that we have agreed as an organization that they are not part of the typical basic offering that commercial industry offers that meets up with what DEOS is expected to be. There is some ability for us to integrate with those capabilities, such as eVoIP and eCVoIP and the video infrastructure that's part of the Department of Defense to deliver those capabilities, but it's not what we see in the commercial products right now. Although I think that's changing in the next few years, we should be able to get to that point. Unified messaging is something that I think is an interesting thing. Typically, you probably have that at home where you can see your voicemail messages in the same way that you can see your email messages or chat messages, et cetera. We want to do the same thing for the Department of Defense. We want to do all of the things about finding folks where they are and collaborating with them in the way that works for the individual. So if I happen to be out of my office, we'd like the phone to ring wherever I am so that I can answer that call. We'd like to know the presence of individuals and where they are and how best to contact them to facilitate the joint collaboration. And that's really what it comes down to in the Department of Defense is we want to facilitate jointness and joint collaboration. And that's something that's a challenge for us if everybody goes their own separate way. If everybody doesn't share the same directory service and be able to have the visibility into presence and awareness, that would be, I think, an unfortunate outcome of our effort. So the other thing, our goal, as I mentioned, is affordability. So I believe that we should achieve DoD level buying power by doing this one time as a single entity versus everybody doing it separately. I also expect that we can better secure our cybersecurity boundary. So what does that mean? Right now we have base level, regional level, service level, agency level services, in addition to those enterprise services that DISA offers. So if everybody has their own email or SharePoint instances, what we have is a ton of different configurations about how that service is secured. And typically, a lot of them are based on the same technologies, but they're run by different organizations. And so the effort to secure them, when we talked about what Joint Force Headquarters-dodin is doing, when they put out a cyber tasking order in response to a known threat, everybody has to go through the process of securing their own infrastructure, their own services, according to that cyber tasking order. We as the department would like to do that one time at the enterprise level. That implies that we're going to have to be really vigilant about how we secure a cloud-based software as a service, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just 1 second. Hammer home one more time, commercially available services. So I do not want to develop what I call commodity IT services that industry already has in place. We want our Department of Defense military and civilian folks instead to be focusing on cyber defense and cyber offensive missions rather than delivering commercial IT. That's just not a mission area that we need to be in ourselves, and that's frankly what we're doing at the enterprise level and all across the department right now. Virtual on-premise, this probably will generate more questions than anything that we talk about, but what we mean is we are going to connect the DoDin directly to a commercial cloud offering to deliver these capabilities. So first off, I want to say within the DoDin security boundary means that we will envelop that cloud offering and ensure that it is secured, but we will treat it as if it were in one of our own computing centers. And that's an important issue. Is we're going to treat a cloud offering the same way as we would one of our own computing centers. It requires FedRAMP and all the DoD extensions to FedRAMP for us to connect that. And in some cases, we're going to expect it actually to be in a DoD computing center. And those cases right now appear to only be in non-U.S. locations. And so it's not a security issue so much as an issue associated with whether or not the host nations would have access to our data in a commercial facility overseas. That's the issue that we see for virtual on-premise. But it is an area of deep concern to make sure that we can achieve similar security or better security and to do it fewer times than what we do right now. And the final piece of that is the link of security to affordability. So if we're asking for a service that doesn't have sufficient shared back end with with a large enough customer base to make this affordable, then we're going to be in trouble delivering this as an enterprise service. So we actually should just be getting back a set of information from industry about how long it will take to achieve the virtual on-premise and how much that would cost compared to some of their own federal or commercially available services. We talked already about evergreening, so I think that's pretty straightforward. And I want to talk about the nature of what we're doing. We intend to make DEOS an IDIQ contract that each of the services will be able to adopt as appropriate. So when it's appropriate for the Air Force, the Army, the Navy to move to DEOS, depending on what they do, legacy, organic, or contractually, they can move to it. And it will also be a tiered model where they can choose the level anywhere from email only up to the full set of UC Suite. It's not a full checkbox menu, but it is 4 tiers of usage that we think exist here, and that's what the services have asked for. I want to jump right now, related to that, to the very last section, leverage component IT funding. So the interesting thing about DEOS, it is not a major funding request within DISA. So it will be a subscription service that organizations make their own business case and decide when it's time to move over. So if we want to specifically talk about affordability, you see some numbers here right now. Organizations typically pay for most users about $39 a year for enterprise email, $52 a year for enterprise portal service or the SharePoint capability that we offer. DCS is a little different because it's provided, that is actually funded centrally, but it is a pretty low-cost service. So this shows what organizations that leverage existing DoD IT services pay, but each organization is different. The Navy uses their NMCI NGen contracts to deliver some of these capabilities. The Air Force has done some work similar to this in Collaboration Pathfinder. They have some legacy organic capabilities as well. So everybody's going to have to make their individual decisions on what affordability means. But our goal is to make sure that we have a contract in place that provides affordability compared to at least our own enterprise offerings. And so we have submitted a business case to the folks in the Pentagon that shows that it's appropriate to move from what we've done with these legacy capabilities to DEOS. So our activities that we're working on in the area of DEOS right now is we're finalizing our acquisition strategy in coordination with our friends in AT&L. We are working our business case with AT&L, DPAP, CAPE, as well as now this system has been categorized as a business system, so it falls under the Deputy Chief Management Officer, DCMO within the Pentagon. So we're getting all the love and attention that you would expect of a program that has to be large enough in terms of ceiling and scope to support the entire Department of Defense for a good period of time. We're also coordinating through a group called ECAPS, Enterprise Collaboration and Productivity Services, which replaced the old UC steering group. The services are giving us input on the quantity of users, the different tiers they would need, and their timelines for when they would onboard to a service like DEOS. In the future, Our plan is to release an RFP. We've done a number of RFIs. I don't believe that the RFP for DEOS can come out any sooner than late August at present, given the coordination that's going on with us and the folks in the Pentagon as well as the services. We are also hammering on the requirements. So we showed a picture of the requirements. It will probably not surprise anybody that's worked with the Department of Defense, but the requirements document is now in the 80-page range for what I'm telling you is a commercially available service. I would like it to be a much shorter document. It's hard to get our partners within the Department of Defense to recognize they are going to leverage a commercially available capability. So when we've gone out with RFIs to industry, we have asked, what things are we asking for that are not what you offer commercially? And we have been vigilant about trying to redline any of those additional requirements that somebody's adding in to try to make this something other than a non-developmental project. Once we put a contract in place, as I mentioned, it's an IDIQ. We intend to stand up the service within the continental United States first for NIPRNet. And that's frankly just the lowest hanging fruit that we have. It's the quantity of users that we expect to be able to leverage a capability much easier than once we move to CIPRNet and OCONUS. We intend to do that following there. But the first thing that we're going to do is to turn on the service for DISA only, a DISA first option. We're going to do all of the testing that we've done. We're going to share some of those offerings with our mission partners so that they can see precisely what they're going to get, and then we're going to have this service up and running for component migrations according to the timelines and the business cases that they've made for their own individual services. So I want to switch gears for just 1 second and talk a little bit about the capabilities that we currently offer. GBS is a fantastic capability. It replaced a legacy entirely ISDN capability. It's available for appliances, room-based video conferencing, but it's also available on your desktop. And something I think my team has done that's really novel in that area is as this moved to a subscription service, we made sure that the desktop collaboration capability is actually free. So organizations pay for the connection to room-based endpoints and expensive legacy endpoints that we want to try to minimize. So we've used cost models to try to drive the behavior that we want, which is to get away from those really expensive room-based systems and to try to use desktop as much as possible. We do want to eliminate ISDN. The second one there, allied and coalition partners, because we have standards-based video and voice, we actually have a better path ahead for supporting IP-based coalition and allied partners. There's a couple of cross-domain solutions that we have loaned to the multinational information sharing folks to develop our own architecture for how we're going to enable cross-domain. We're going to start with the easy stuff. We've connected up the Five Eyes community to enterprise classified voice over IP and allowed conferencing via GBS. So that's part of the unification of these capabilities so that we don't create separate conferencing capabilities if we have one that exists. We think we're going in the right direction. We're minimizing those appliances, as I mentioned before. If you represent an organization that's within the Department of Defense that doesn't use GBS right now, come talk to us, and I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised at the quality of it. We have the GBS team and some of our industry partners that help us deliver GBS out here on the floor today, and we can help get users signed up and running on the service. Enterprise voice over IP and enterprise classified voice over IP. I talked a little bit about that and what we've done. We have an enterprise session controller based approach to delivering voice, and the technology that we use, we could deliver voice, frankly, for the entire continental United States with a very minimal infrastructure. And we don't need it in all of the locations that we've traditionally needed for legacy TDM. But again, it's a box-hugging mentality for those of us that used to be in the services. We liked the fact that we ran our own voice capabilities in the past. We're having a hard time coming to grips with, anybody else doing it separately for us, but also doing it over IP. We think we have a good approach for that. We have shown that because of the way it works with contracts and existing licensing and so on, it is a very affordable service, and the team is doing wonderful things for our mission partners that have chosen to adopt it. We would like to see more adoption of eVoIP and EC-VoIP to eliminate some of the legacy capabilities that we have for voice. One of the partnerships that we're trying to pursue is with our new organization within DISA, the Joint Service Provider. We are looking to leverage the voice over IP capabilities that they're putting in place to try to support everybody in the National Capital Region from the Department of Defense's perspective. And that does a couple of things for us. One is that it allows us to take some of the hardest use cases for voice and solve those with an enterprise level service. And then those organizations happen to have components all around the world. It will be hard for those organizations to ignore the fact that if we've met the stringent mission requirements of the Pentagon and the National Capital Region, that we can also meet them for those subordinate commands and organizations. As I mentioned, DCS is an open source capability that we developed as a follow-on to the NCES collaboration capability. It has opened up a whole discussion within the agency about open source development and license-free offerings that we have. The service is up and running, and it supports over 400,000 users across the Department of Defense on NIPRNet and SIPRNet. Our goals in the next year are to deliver telephony integration so that customers can either use the integrated audio on their desktop or they can dial into the conference. That's a first baby step, if you will, into mobile access, which is something that we're trying to do as well. And the other thing is, while we're using a cloud-based architecture, it is not the true elastic cloud that we would like. And so we've done things in the old style of having continuity of operations, COOP sites, and back and forth. We're actually in a load balance between the multiple sites that offer the service and reduce the size of the infrastructure to reduce the cost of delivering this. Chat is part of this, and one of the things that's outside of DCS, but under my hat as the UC portfolio manager that I'm interested in, is making sure that we can have a federation or a gateway option for chat across the Department of Defense. Everybody wants to connect to chat, and they don't want to have 12 different tools on their desktop to do it. And there are legacy technologies that simply are not going to go away. We know that our mission partners, especially in the tactical world, have IRC, and we know that some of the other organizations have stood up capabilities like Microsoft Link. We have the ability to connect that and use a gateway for that purpose, and that's something that we're pursuing outside of the DCS program, but under the heading of UC. Wow, that slide blew up. I think what it tells you, though, is it tells you to go to the app and rate the session. But before you do that, though, I'd like to answer any questions anybody might have about all the stuff that I chatted about. Sir.
Good morning. It's John McMonagle from Verizon. On one of the charts you had mentioned requests for proposals in plural. Does that infer a draft RFP, or was I reading too much into it?
You were reading too much.
Okay.
So we've gotten a lot of industry feedback already. Right. There has been discussion about that, but that is not.
Okay.
That is not.
I know you've had a lot of RFIs out, including one today.
Right.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir. Marie Grimmer, Grimmer Technology and Operations. I was wondering, what is the vision for entitlements management and provisioning? Will Depot be used with DOS, or is that going to be moved to more of the commercial service provider side of the house?
So, good question. We've used Depot as a provisioning portion of what we've done with Defense Enterprise Email. It really depends on the technology that we're offered. We are looking at the shared responsibility for onboarding and provisioning between the commercial provider and the role that our customers want. So we know that they want to have a role in some of that, but we want the lion's share of the work to be done on the commercial service provider's part once they're told who needs to have access, just to facilitate the ability of everybody to move on and not spend a lot of time on it. We're taking a close look at what the Air Force has done with Collaboration Pathfinder and looked at the roles and responsibilities that those organizations, that the Air Force organizations have compared to what they used to do with their legacy organic and contract capabilities, so that we can make sure that we offer something that makes sense. But I think it's fair to say that DISA customers want sufficient visibility, but don't necessarily want to have all the responsibility for those actions.
Is it fair to say that what you're looking for is kind of that fine line, which gives control to the services, but not with the burden of having to have a bunch of EMs and GMs globally that have that responsibility?
I think that's definitely true. So they want insight, they want control, they want to be able to assign the rights and privileges for users as they come and go. But yeah, I think it's going to be a shared responsibility. It's new ground for us, adopting a SaaS, cloud-based capability. But we intend it to be a fairly turnkey offering, and we're trying to come to grips with what customers typically have access to and what they don't have access to. And some of that includes not just provisioning, but also NetOps, so that we have sufficient visibility into the service as well.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
A couple questions.
Sure.
The first being on the service infrastructure and the coordination with the ability to get service assurance and any type of modernization with PKI and PKE. So for websites, mobile, and all those types of things, what type of coordination has to go on the DISA side versus the contractor side, and how might that impact what we might see in the RFP for DIOS? And the second question is, getting to the number of users in scale to beat the pricing that you already showed, what numbers are we looking at?
So I can't talk specifically about the numbers associated with what we have in our independent government cost estimate, but I use those as a comparison so organizations that might be looking at it can see as transparently as possible. Anybody can go to the DISA site and look up what our rates are for those services. I don't have the rates for all of the other MILDEPs for all the things that they do, so that's going to be a key component in them making a decision about whether or not DIOS is affordable for them. And what was that first part?
About the service infrastructure. So a lot of coordination in order to have the capabilities for mobile
Right.
websites, for PKI, those types
Sure.
of things, and service assurance. So what might we see in the RFP that's coordinated with those things, or is that in other contracts, in other parts of DISA?
So it will be within the contract. There is a requirement right now for the identity and access management the way we do it now. We have talked to industry. We understand all the various capabilities and some of the discussion that we had yesterday about the different futures for PKI and for identity and access management. So I expect that you'll see that in the RFP. We have looked at how we secure capabilities for mobile access. It's a challenge for us somewhat right now. The mobility team within DISA has done some great work with what we call purebred, and that is our current standard, and that's what I expect to see as the initial requirement for mobile security associated with DIOS.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Hermann, Mike Warlick, I've got two questions for you. I think they're really relevant here. You talked about NGEN and NMCI. So NMCI was a first attempt to try to bring services together for their IT services, and then NGEN was a follow-on. That whole process was almost like 18 years, I think, give or take. And then Enterprise Mail has come along here in the last few years. How do you compare or how much DISA oversight was there in the NMCI, the NGen, and I suspect there's a lot more over enterprise mail. Could you talk to that point? And the next point is, it's about core competencies for the services. At what point do you outsource where you don't need, or if you can determine what that core competency is not needed, because we don't want to hurt the services with outsourcing, but at the same time, you got to have people trained and ready to go for deployments in particular. Thanks.
Absolutely. So the first part of it, NMCI and NGen was probably the most interesting outsourcing scenario that I've seen in the Department of Defense. The initial goal was for the entire infrastructure as well as services to be outsourced. They pulled back from that a little bit over the years, and at least the Navy owns the infrastructure that's delivered as part of that. So the difference between DIOS and NMCI and NGen is that this is expected to be a service that runs on DoD, or that is connected to DoD infrastructure, so users can come into the service on whatever infrastructure that they have. We are not going to dictate hardware platforms and that kind of stuff for those organizations. They still own it. As General Lynn and several others said yesterday, we do not typically drive down to the base level for our capabilities. We make sure that they're available at the enterprise. We deliver it to the DISN points of presence, and then the organizations have the responsibility to have sufficient bandwidth and modernized desktops and equipment to connect to that service. So it's a little bit different there. DEE shows exactly that, is we put a service in place, we made available to everybody. We had the right cyber tasking orders in terms of ports and protocols, and that service is up and running. We kind of expect that to be the same way that DIOS works as well. I think it's the right approach. We know that historically we've done a lot of these capabilities on our own because we had to figure out how we were going to leverage technologies like email over the years. And so we had enterprising young folks that set up the initial email capabilities in the Department of Defense, and over time that grew to be an increasing burden. And so we had to have organizations that knew how to do that stuff, and we had to have it, as you mentioned, for a tactical support. And I think that's a great point too, and something I didn't really touch on much, is that DIOS is intended to have a CLIN, if you will, to support tactical users. So organizations can get a stack of these capabilities that will be locally delivered for them and then federated with the enterprise when it's appropriate and possible. So if you're in the DIL environment, the disconnected, intermittently connected, or low bandwidth environment, there's the ability to have service locally. You can think about it in the Navy's parlance, is you could have, the battle group would have services available within the battle group, but if they're not connected to anybody else, that's as far as it goes. But once they are connected, then they have the ability to connect back. But I think it's a fine line to figure out exactly who delivers what and how and what those competencies are. Generally, with the exception of that unique sort of tactical and mobile environment, we don't expect those things to be parts of what the Department of Defense is doing long range, especially for what I call the well-connected DoD business type user. So the garrison users should be able to use DIOS out of the box very easily and quickly, and I think consistent with what the Air Force has done with Pathfinder and some of the other prototyping efforts that have gone on, we can change the mission set, the roles for our own organic support for IT to do more cyber offense and defense related activities. And I'm not sure that's fair for the guy giving the introductions to ask questions. Anything else?
Hi, my name is Grady Tucker. I'm with Alfresco Software.
Yes.
And we're an open source records management product. Been following your RFIs very carefully. There's a couple of things that I haven't seen in the RFIs that concern me. One is scalability. When you have over 2 million users generating the quantities of emails that they do today, you need to be very careful about legacy records management products that weren't designed to handle that amount of email.
Right.
Spillage control. and prevention. I haven't seen any questions about that, and that's something we're running into at the DON Tracker program that we're implementing in the U.S. Navy. And then you need a very sophisticated security model to make sure that records managers from all of these different organizations can't see each other's content. So,
absolutely. So I couldn't agree more. As I mentioned, we're typically doing a lot of this stuff manually, but some organizations do have those capabilities, and frankly, that goes for content management as well. So we're not just talking about organizational files and sharing of information. We're talking about the legal records that we're required, and we have to make sure that we limit the visibility. Generally, with content, what we're trying to do is to ensure maximum sharing so that folks can discover the information that they need to do their job. With records management, we have to be a little bit more careful with that. That's why, frankly, I see some of that as a bolt-on, because the native records management capability that exists in these commercial products today is not fully NARA compliant, does not provide those capabilities, and so we're going to choose something as an adjunct to this service to try to get to all those actions. But I'll take that feedback as well. Thank you.
Thomas Sand from Mission Partner Outreach. I represent all the federal agencies, Department of Justice, Department of State, and so on. Are you going to offer this as a service for the federal agencies as well?
So, great question. The current intent, we've had lengthy discussions about that. The current intent is for this service to be for the Department of Defense and to include the Coast Guard right now. It is not intended to be offered as a service for the entire federal government. Although, depending on I will say it this way, depending on the security model that we wind up with, whether or not that infrastructure is something that can be shared with our federal partners, will dictate whether or not a similar capability could be offered by a vendor for those customers. But it's not part of our calculation for the total cost of DDoS over time. But I recognize that historically we have always wanted to have the ability to collaborate with our federal mission partners, with our state, local, tribal, as well as with our allied and coalition, and we have to figure out a way to make that happen. Okay. All right, thank you very much for your time and attention. Appreciate it.